The story of Noah's Ark is, of course, a story. The books of the various great religions, Buddhist, Hindu, Islamic, Jewish, Christian, and many others, are filled with stories. That doesn't mean we are to interpret them literally, and there are all sorts of problems with the Noah's Ark story, one of which is kangaroos. How did the kangaroos get to Australia if you literally believed the story of Noah's Ark? So I'm sure you meant that in a light tone, and my response is likewise. How to keep kids in school? Well, kids, I believe, are fundamentally very smart. And if they see school being taught by people who themselves are not interested in it, people who cannot do very well at teaching, if what they're being taught has no practical application, then why should they do it? So, for example, there's an awful lot of kids graduating high school who go into entry-level jobs in the service economy, waiting on tables, slinging hash, and so on. Now, do they get more money if they were good in second-year algebra? The answer is no. And they understand that. If there were more jobs that required this kind of education, there would be more kids who would go into that kind of education with some enthusiasm. If there were a connection between how well you did in school and how fast your salary increased later, as there is in many countries, kids would be much more interested.
Let's talk about this. This is interesting.
Well, there's a just tremendously exciting prospect called solar sailing.
Solar sailing.
And this is a very crude model, and which travels on the radiation and particles that come out of the sun, the wind from the sun. And it works exactly as an ordinary sailboat does. So it can go out from the sun, it can tack inwards to the sun, and because it has a constant acceleration, it can get you around the inner part of the solar system a lot faster and a lot more conveniently than the usual sorts of rocket propulsion.
Now, what would this do?
Well, it takes you to where you want to go. So one mission that's being talked about is to rendezvous with Halley's Comet.
I've always wanted to do that.
Well, nobody's ever looked at a comet close up, and it lives mostly in the outermost part of the solar system. In fact, mostly lives between the stars. Also, this thing itself is, I think, tremendously exciting, because I kind of imagine some big device, emblem, not on this side, but on the other side. I don't know what the symbol would be.
Over 20 billion served.
But
Don't tell McDonald's. Don't tell McDonald's. They'll want to get in on this.
Sure
Can you imagine that
sell
advertising? Man,
space,
outer space advertising.
but I hope we can do something slightly more
Creative.
elevated.
I hope so, too.
But on the other hand, it's just an extraordinary idea, and there might be a time when we start doing interplanetary regattas. See, it's a whole new kind of idea.
We'll be right back.
I've been to Halley.
My feeling, Charlie, is that it's not that pseudoscience and superstition and New Age so-called beliefs and fundamentalist zealotry are something new. They've been with us for as long as we've been human. But we live in an age based on science and technology with formidable technological powers.
Science and technology are propelling us forward at accelerating rates.
That's right. And if we don't understand it, by we I mean the general public, if it's something that, oh, I'm not good at that, I don't know anything about it, then who is making all the decisions about science and technology that are going to determine what kind of future our children live in? Just some members of Congress? But there's no more than a handful of members of Congress with any background in science at all. And the Republican Congress has just abolished its own Office of Technology Assessment, the organization that gave them bipartisan, competent advice on science and technology. They say, we don't want to know. Don't tell us about science and technology.
Surprising, the danger of all this. I mean, you know, this is not the thing that...
There's two kinds of dangers. One is what I just talked about, that we've arranged a society based on science and technology, in which nobody understands anything about science and technology, and this combustible mixture of ignorance and power, sooner or later, is going to blow up in our faces. I mean, who is running the science and technology in a democracy if the people don't know anything about it? And the second reason that I'm worried about this is that science is more than a body of knowledge. It's a way of thinking, a way of skeptically interrogating the universe with a fine understanding of human fallibility. If we are not able to ask skeptical questions, to interrogate those who tell us that something is true, to be skeptical of those in authority, then we're up for grabs for the next charlatan, political or religious, who comes ambling along. It's a thing that Jefferson laid great stress on. It wasn't enough, he said, to enshrine some rights in a constitution or a Bill of Rights. The people had to be educated, and they had to practice their skepticism and their education. Otherwise, we don't run the government. The government runs us.
I think the essence of the scientific method is the willingness to admit you're wrong, the willingness to abandon ideas that don't work, and the essence of religion is not to change anything. The supposed truths are handed down by some revered figure, and then no one is supposed to make any progress beyond that, because all the truth is thought to be in hand.
I'm really talking about setting
Please.
an agenda for the future.
My sense is that the scientific way of thinking, questioning, some delicate mix of creative encouragement of new ideas and the most rigorous and skeptical scrutiny of new and old ideas, I think that is the path to the future, not just for science, but for all human institutions. We have to be willing to challenge because we are in desperate need of change.
Can I put...
Any other questions? I'd be happy to take them from people who aren't members of Congress. Yes, one here?
I think it's correct on the series Cosmos suggested that we might use nuclear powered spacecraft to explore the other, the rest of the universe. How do you feel about that today? Is it correct? Is it?
I'll tell you in a minute. In Cosmos, I talked about a proposal, which was called Project Orion, which came out of, in fact, the U.S. weapons laboratories, which was to use nuclear weapons to propel against a kind of pusher plate, putt, 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 each nuclear explosion being a putt, a spacecraft, large spacecraft at eventually high speed to the outer solar system and beyond. And I gave that as one of many examples of the kinds of technology which are then being thought of. But I stated there that there were certain undesirable side effects of this means of propulsion. The good one was you'd be destroying a lot of nuclear weapons in the process, but the bad one was you'd be contaminating nearby space with radiation, and you would not want to launch too near the Earth, and so on. In any case, this is not a feasible present technology for this purpose, and nuclear weapons are being dismantled in a more direct way, both tactical and strategic weapons in the United States, and I hope in Russia.
What is faith? It is belief in the absence of evidence. Now, I don't propose to tell anybody what to believe, but for me, believing when there's no compelling evidence is a mistake. The idea is to withhold belief until there is compelling evidence. And if the universe does not comply with our predispositions, okay, then we have the wrenching obligation to accommodate to the way the universe really is.
So you step forward to say, I deny all religion because I can't see it proved scientifically?
No. You see,
the value of religious experience and the value of reaching for higher experiences.
Let me say, religion deals with history, with poetry, with great literature, with ethics, with morals, including the morality of treating compassionately the least fortunate among us. All of these are things that I endorse wholeheartedly. Where religion gets into trouble is in those cases that it pretends to know something about science. The science in the Bible, for example, was acquired by the Jews from the Babylonians
during the Babylonian captivity of 600 BC. That was the best science on the planet then. But we've learned something since then. Roman Catholicism, Reformed Judaism, most of the mainstream Protestant denominations have no difficulty with the idea that humans have evolved from other creatures, that the Earth is 4.6 billion years old, with the Big Bang. They don't have any trouble with that. The trouble comes with people who are biblical literalists, who believe that the Bible is dictated by the creator of the universe to an unerring stenographer.
And so therefore they...
And has no metaphor or allegory.
And from there they make their political and economic choices. And social choices.
And scientific.
And scientific choices. And scientific. And that's part of your problem with that idea.
Exactly.
It is that because for the wrong reasons we make the wrong choices about science.
That's right. So who is more humble? The scientist who looks at the universe with an open mind and accepts whatever the universe has to teach us, or somebody who says everything in this book must be considered the literal truth and never mind the fallibility of all the human beings involved in the writing of this book?
What does it do for you to
I didn't have any near-death
say to you?
I didn't have any near-death experiences. I didn't have a religious conversion, but
you thought about what it would be like to die.
Certainly, and what it would be like for my family, and I didn't much think about what it would be like for me, because I don't think it's likely there's anything that you think about after you're dead.
That's it, huh?
Yeah, long dreamless sleep. I'd love to believe the opposite, but I don't know of any evidence.
Well, are you a socialist?
I'm not sure what a socialist is,
Well,
but I believe that the government has a responsibility to care for the people. I'm not talking about dole. I'm talking about making people self-reliant, people able to take care of themselves. There are countries which are perfectly able to do that. The United States is an extremely rich country. It's perfectly able to do that. It chooses not to. It chooses to have homeless people. It chooses... We are 19th in the world in infant mortality. 18 other countries save the lives of their babies better than we. How come? They just spend more money on it. They care about their babies more than we care about ours. I think it's a disgrace. And this country has vast wealth. You just look at what something like Star Wars. The money spent on Star Wars, already spent $20 billion on it. If these guys are permitted to go ahead, they will spend $1 trillion on Star Wars. Think of what that money could be used for, to educate, to help, to bring people up to a sense of self-confidence, to improve not just the happiness of people in America, but their economic standing, to improve the competitiveness of the United States compared to other countries. We are using money for the wrong stuff.
Carl, do you think time travel's possible?
There's two kinds of dangers. One is what I just talked about, that we've arranged a society based on science and technology in which nobody understands anything about science and technology, and this combustible mixture of ignorance and power, sooner or later, is going to blow up in our faces. I mean, who is running the science and technology in a democracy if the people don't know anything about it? And the second reason that I'm worried about this is that science is more than a body of knowledge. It's a way of thinking, a way of skeptically interrogating the universe with a fine understanding of human fallibility. If we are not able to ask skeptical questions, to interrogate those who tell us that something is true, to be skeptical of those in authority, then we're up for grabs for the next charlatan, political or religious, who comes ambling along. It's a thing that Jefferson laid great stress on. It wasn't enough, he said, to enshrine some rights in a Constitution or a Bill of Rights. The people had to be educated, and they had to practice their skepticism and their education. Otherwise, we don't run the government. The government runs us. Here's this spacecraft that has flown by the Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune systems, is on its way, astonishingly, to the stars, a triumph of human engineering. We turn the cameras back and take a photograph of the planet from where it came. And we can barely see it. Here it is,
a fragile, delicate, pale blue dot, and that's where we live. That's where every human has ever lived, and you can see the vulnerability at a glance. And that gives a humbling and, I think, character-building sense of where we are.
Humbling because it says that we're only one small portion of something that is enormously large?
Absolutely. And let me say a word about what that is. This dot is one of 9 planets that goes around a humdrum star that lives at the outskirts of a perfectly ordinary galaxy, which is composed of 400 billion other stars in a universe of maybe 100 billion galaxies. Yeah. And recent thoughts suggest this universe one of a very large number, perhaps an infinite number of other closed-off universes. Yeah. In that context, what is the chance that we are the center or the point of the universe?
There's a nice way to write large numbers. You can write the number 1,000 as 10 to the power 3, meaning a 1 followed by 3 zeros. Or a million is written as 10 to the power 6, meaning a 1 followed by 6 zeros. There's no largest number. If anybody gives you a candidate largest number, you can always add the number 1 to it. But there certainly are very big numbers. The American mathematician Edward Kasner once asked his young nephew to invent a name for an extremely large number, 10 to the power 100, which I can't write out all the zeros in this page for because there isn't room on the page. The boy called it a googol. If you think a googol is large, consider a googolplex. It's 10 to the power of a googol. That is a 1 followed not by 100 zeros, but by a googol zeros. Now, by comparison with these enormous numbers, the total number of atoms in that apple pie is only about 10 to the 26th, tiny compared to a googol, and of course much, much less than a googolplex. The total number of elementary particles, protons, neutrons, and electrons, in the accessible universe is of the order of 10 to the 80th, 1 followed by 80 zeros, still